So as usual, when we come in for each video, at least most of them anyways, we're going to set projects, right? In this case, we're still in project 1, so we don't have to create a new project yet. We'll create a new project for project 2. So like I said, we'll get to see it 5 more times this semester. But we'll go to File, and we're going to go Set Project, right? Because that makes that the active project. That means that it takes you to all the proper folders, and you, particularly with any like referenced models, which we'll see in a later small exercise, which is super easy. But also particularly with like textures and image planes for like reference images, right? Everything knows where to point, right? They're all kind of organized in one folder with a bunch of subfolders, and everything knows where to point. So when you set the project and you load a Maya scene in, it knows where to find all the pictures that are loaded into Maya. Remember, those reference images, later on we do texturing. Texturing is just images. Those are all loaded in to the proper places, right? It knows where to find them. That's the great benefit of projects. It's kind of like its own little self-contained set of directories. So that's why we set project. File, set project. Then of course we'll find it right there, project 1. And we'll hit set, and that's our project set. And now of course we can go file, open scene, and there's the bed because that's our second model, right? So we end up creating 2 scenes, and they both go into project 1, and so they go in the scenes folder. So we hit open, and we'll say don't save because that's just wanting to save the kind of new scene here. All right, there we go, and there's our bed, right? And you see it loads the reference image in and everything like that because basically when you set the project, it knows where to find this, right? Remember, this is its own file, and if you just put it anywhere you wanted to, if you had to say move this to your computer, one, if it's not where you think it's at, you might not bring it, and Maya won't be able to load it in. This image, remember, and the same applies for textures, is not in Maya, right? Maya doesn't save these in the scene. What it does is it finds them outside of the scene and it loads them in every time you load the scene up. That's what's the great thing about projects, right? Is they kind of allow you to do that. So that everything knows where to point, right? When you load the scene in, it says, oh, this was loaded into this project in this folder, so boom, loaded it in. And that way it's really easy to, if you need to move around computers, projects are great for that. So what I wanted to do for this video was really I wanted to show you guys how to build the railing. Now the nice thing is this is going to be pretty easy. It's going to be mostly tools we already know, although I am going to show you symmetry for the first time over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with that. And we see that the railing, and I'm not going to just do every little railing, like these little guys right here are really just going to be extensions of this. Like how you make this would be how you'd make these as well, right? These are just going to be straightforward linear ones that are pretty easy. So I probably won't make these just because it's going to be exactly this. And that's the part that if you use a different image, might be a little bit different on yours, right? Remember, you want there to be bedposts that are kind of more square on the bottom and some kind of a cylindrical shape on the top. It doesn't have to exactly be a globe or a ball, but something kind of cylindrical and stuff like that. Should have some railings with a little bit of curvature as well. That's always kind of good because this will allow me to show you what I'm going to show you here. And then of course all beds have blankets and pillows. So what we want to do is when we look at that, that's actually pretty cube-like, right? I know it doesn't look like it, but when you actually look at it, it is kind of a squarish shape. It's just kind of elongated and bent, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to create polygon primitives, right? Cube, right? Create polygon primitives cube. There we go. And then we're going to hit W for move, right? And then we're going to left click drag on that blue arrow to move it forward. Now it's quite large, so we'll hit R for scale. Remember, they're all right here too, right? And then we'll just left click drag on that center one, right? Usually it's a light blue, but remember, whatever the active manipulator is, that's kind of the what's going to be yellow. So I can left click drag on that one, and you see how it scales all 3 dimensions at the same time, right? So we can make that a lot smaller. We'll hit W again to kind of bring it up a little bit because it goes a little bit above the bed. And I do want to make it a little bit longer on the red axis, right, which is X. So I'm going to hit R for scale. And remember, you can just left click drag just on that scale handle. Now, one of the things you guys have probably noticed, besides just these normal handles, those only do one axis at a time, right? So it's only doing X axis. This center one does all 3 at the same time, but you'll notice that there are these little squares also. And you notice these squares only do 2 at a time, right? So I can kind of make them thinner just along these 2 axes, or those, right? So kind of neat, right? And you'll see the move tool has exactly that same stuff as well, except that does kind of view move, right? It moves relative to the camera itself. Rotate doesn't quite have those, it just has these, but it does have a view rotate of its own. So just kind of want to point those out. Remember, when an object is selected, if you hit F, right, that frame selection, it kind of zooms your camera in and sets your camera rotate around the object. And remember, my navigation is Alt left mouse button, Alt middle mouse button, which is the scroll wheel, an alt-right mouse button, right? If you don't have a mouse for this class, get a mouse. Doesn't have to be terribly expensive, right? Get a mouse. You're going to need it. So I'll hit W again, just move it back on that blue arrow to kind of get it closer where the railing should be. Something like that. Now in this case, I want to use symmetry. This is kind of probably going to be the big thing to do here, because the rest of it's just going to be creating some primitives, duplicating them, which we've done before a little bit, and mirroring a little bit, right, and extruding. So this is probably going to be the new thing, is symmetry. And Maya's quite good at this, right? Now, for symmetry to really, really work well, though, you do usually want, for it to work its most reliably and most predictably, you want an edge loop down the center of your model, particularly if it's going to be symmetrical, right? Symmetry means that it's the same on at least, two sides. It's a mirror image on one side to the other side. So basically, if you'd mirror an object, you could use symmetry with it, right? But to do that, we really want the edge loop down the center. That way, if you ever need to delete half and use the mirror tool, you can, right? But also, at the end of the day, the symmetry just works better with that. So we go to multi-cut, right? Good old multi-cut tool over here in Modeling Toolkit. Remember, it's Control-Shift-X. However, that actually is the quick key for my capture software. So unfortunately, I'm not going to use the quick key for these lectures for it. But it is Control-Shift-X, just like Extrude is Control-E. Now in this case, I've got my snap percentage size, because you see when you click on multi-cut, there are options, right? There's this little scroll bar on the Modeling Toolkit, and you see there's options right here. We'll talk about some more of these later on as we go through the semester, things like edge flow, slice tool, things like that. But for now, all we really need is the very top one, which is the snap percentage size. Now, if you want to leave it at 10, that's okay, right? Because if you hold down Control, right, when multi-cut tool's on, when you hold down Control, remember, whatever edge you're over, you see how it's going to kind of try to put that edge loop in that direction. Remember, there's that video I kind of made earlier this week that kind of went over, it was kind of the concept video, right? That wasn't actually any modeling, just kind of concepts. So remember, the edge loops always go in perpendicular, and they really, really work reliably with quads. One of the reasons why we like quads. But you hold down Control, and you can kind of put it anywhere, right? When you use Control-Shift, right? So Control allows you to put the edge loop in. Control-Shift snaps it. And you see by default, it's going to the units of 10. Now, one of the units of 10% is 50%, which is the middle, right? So you don't even have to change this if you don't want to. But if you really just want it to snap to the middle easier, just type in 50 for 50%. And then when you hold down Control-Shift, you see how it only snaps to the center? So that'll make it really easy to put an edge loop right down the center there. But that's really cool. You have the ability to kind of type in the snap percentage size. So cool. All right. So now in this case, what I want to do is I'm going to hit Q, right? Q is your quick key for your selection, right? That'll turn off whatever your active tool is. So a great way to turn off any tool that you're in is just hit Q, right? That's your selection tool. All right. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to go to face mode. So I'm going to hold down right mouse button. Come on, hold down right. So remember, when you hold down right mouse button, right? It brings up this marking menu, right? It has vertex, edge, face, object mode. Your kind of 4 major selection types. So we're going to go to face. Now in this case, I'm going to turn symmetry on in a minute here, but you'll notice right now that if I was to select, say, this side and hit W for move, see how it's only moving this one? What if I wanted to have it move both sides? Well, in Modeling Toolkit, although technically you can kind of get it in other areas as well, right? You actually see it right here, right? You have your symmetry functions right there. But it's also a Modeling Toolkit. So if we go to symmetry and we click on this little triangle, because right now see it's off, you'll notice that we can pick object, world, or even topology. Now object will be relative to an object, so if you aren't building something on 0, but it is a symmetrical object with edge down the center, object can do that. World is going to use the exact world axis, so you really want your object to be, at least on the axis you want it to be symmetrical on, the 0. In this case, the x-axis. Notice how it's still kind of, perfectly lined up on the 0 symmetrically. So in this case, you wouldn't have it be over here, right? So if I had this over here and I tried to turn on world symmetry, see how it's not going to work, right? We could turn on object symmetry and that would work, right? So that's kind of the difference between object and world. But in this case, we want it to be centered anyways. And topology actually has its own really cool things. And we'll talk about this more. We're not trying to get you to know everything about symmetry yet, but I wanted to get you guys a good start. So I'm going to pick world X, because in this case, I want to select this polygon and I have to select this one so we can move it around on the X-axis. So we're going to pick world X. So remember, you just click on that triangle and pick world X. And now you'll see if I hold down right mouse button over my object, go to face, you'll notice it selects the faces on both sides. And what we can then do is we can actually move this out. We can move it down, right? Now, if we wanted to, we could also grab kind of this little blue square because it'll move those two axes at the same time. Now, the thing though is this kind of bends down. So extruding to create more geometry to do this is a big part of that, so I'm going to do in a minute. But also, you really want your shapes to follow the contour of the form, right? In this case, it's going to be really simple, but we're going to see it's going to get a little more complicated in later models. So it's not just enough to move it down, we also want to rotate it a little bit. So I'll hit E for rotate, right? Remember, they're all right here, but E for rotate. In this case, I want to rotate on the Z-axis, the blue, right? So I'll just left click drag a little bit, and so I'll just kind of bend it so it's bending down just a little bit, right? And then, of course, I can extrude. And I can hit W for move for the regular free move tool because it'll be easier to use these handles than the default ones it gives us. So I can grab that kind of blue square again. Although if you feel more comfortable just moving it here and here, you can do that as well. It's just that this kind of does both at the same time. And then I'll hit E for rotate to rotate this down a little more. And you see how I can start to extrude this bar out. So it's kind of one of those things where you think, well, how am I going to get a bar from a cube? Well, the cube's really just the starting point, right? And most things are actually boxier than you think they are. So cubes are actually what we start with a lot of the time for a lot of models. Not all models, but many of them. Then we'll do another extrusion. And I'll hit W for the regular move tool, right? Remember, if your axes aren't lined up to the world, you can go down to the move settings here in Modeling Toolkit, and you can change that to world. That's a good default to have. We'll talk about things like component and custom later on. Those can be quite useful. But for right now, world's good. So if you're having your manipulator behave weird, like it's like oriented weirdly or something like that, just go down here and pull this triangle, set it to world. All right. So in this case, I already did that extrusion, so I can move this down. I probably don't need to rotate it that much, maybe a little bit. E for rotate, and then we'll extrude, W for move. And you see how I can slowly kind of start to build this out. Now in this case, it's probably going to start to come back out this way a little bit. So I'll maybe kind of rotate a little bit that way, all right? And remember, Control E is the quick key for extrusion, Control E, right? Hit W for regular move. So oftentimes when I extrude, I'll switch to my regular move tool because I have a little more control over the directions it's going to go. E for rotate, rotate that a little bit. Remember, it's just the extrude tool, right? Because right now by default, it usually is just going to move along normal direction, which is not bad in this case, but there will be times when it is. So I prefer usually extruding and then just using my regular move tools. And then we'll do a little bit of rotating. So see how it's moving. It's extruding to create new geometry, right? But it's also just moving and rotating to kind of create the shape to bend it. So I'll extrude again. Kind of bring this up a little bit. Extrude again. Bring this over here a little bit. A little bit of rotate, right? E for rotate. So it starts to bend down. So I want to get that little bit of a kink there. Extrude again. W for move. Kind of bring that down a little bit. Maybe rotate a little bit. Extrude again. Let's kind of see here. It's going to kind of start to come back out this way. But we need to start to bend it back this way, right? So you see how we're kind of bending it as it goes, right? And we'll extrude. And there we go. We kind of have our railing here. Now remember, the cool thing about this is I can always go back in. And if I hold down right mouse button, I can go to edge mode, right? So I can just go to edge selection. And if I need to, I can go back in here, double click. Remember, double left click. And I can rotate this. So remember, you can always modify these things at a later date, right? So if I want to double click on that edge loop, I can rotate that a little bit. So you might find that you just kind of want to maybe make some minor adjustments after the fact. Remember, double left click on an edge allows you to go back and edit those edge loops. So maybe you find once you've done it that you maybe need to make some minor adjustments here, right? So I can just double left click and I can kind of make some minor little adjustments. And of course, multi-cut can still be used. So I can go to multi-cut and I can hold down Control to put an edge loop through there. Then maybe double left click on that one. You see how I can make these kind of great little adjustments as you work, right? So remember, I'm just double left clicking to select an edge loop. And you can always move and rotate these to adjust and get the extra shapes. So that's how you can actually make kind of a cool little bit of railing with basically tools you already know, right? We start with a cube. We've been using multi-cut and extrude with a little bit of move and rotate, but we now have symmetry. And symmetry is pretty neat, right? Symmetry is pretty neat. Now in this case, I probably do want some bevels on these corners. So, hold down right mouse button, edge mode. And if you want, you can just hit Q to turn your regular selection tool once your move tool's not on. And I don't really want to bevel these directions, right? We've been beveling whole objects up to this point, basically, right? Remember though, you can actually selectively bevel whatever edges are there. So if I double left click, remember just double left mouse button. Remember, Shift adds to selection. So I can double left click there, Shift double left click, Shift double left click. You see how it selected just those edge loops? And I can easily just go in here and throw a quick bevel on those. Turn that fraction down to maybe 0.3, even 0.2. And in this case, it's probably small enough to maybe only do segments 2 instead of segments 3. But remember, fractions the size of your bevel. Segments gives it some extra edge loops to make it more rounded at the corner. But remember, you should have bevels by default on stuff unless there's a good reason not to. Games or an object being really far away in film is usually a good reason not to have a bevel. But it depends, right? But bevels are kind of things you should have if you can have them, right? Because they add that proper rounded corner. Things actually have bevels, otherwise they would kill you, right? They'd be too sharp. So what I can do is I can then, these railings are identical, right? So I can just go to Edit. And remember, there's a duplicate right here in Edit, right? Control D. This duplicates whole objects, right? So I went out to Object Mode. Hold down right mouse button, Object Mode, make sure it's a green wireframe, Edit Duplicate. And then I can hit W for Move, grab the green arrow to move it down, and there's our next bit of railing. Now, these guys right here, believe it or not, you could start this as cubes and just extrude, move, rotate, right? So exactly the way I made this is how you could do these other parts right here, but they'd be their own little separate objects, right? So you start with a new cube, and you'd extrude, move, rotate. So exactly the way I made this is exactly the way you'd make those. They might just be a little bit more curvy, right? So you'll do the move and rotates. So that's why I'm not going to show you those because, well, I kind of already did, right, with these. And I just can point it out. Now these ones down here you'll see are just straightforward linear ones. So I can easily go into create polygon primitive cube, right? W for the move tool's already on. It's already in object mode. But remember, hold down right mouse button, object mode. R for scale. And I can grab that center handle. There we go. And we can make those pretty small. And of course they're pretty tall, so I'll kind of just grab that green handle, left click drag, to make this much taller. There we go. And I can hit W for move, and I can move it kind of down here. And that's a little bit tall actually now I'm seeing it, so I can hit R for scale to scale it back down a little bit. And we just kind of slowly move it into position here. There we go, because we do have like a center one right there, right? And that'll work well for that one. Now in this case I can turn symmetry off, because I don't really need symmetry on for this one. And of course I can go to edge mode, and in this case I'll just select all the edges, because there's not much there. And we can do a quick bevel, give it a fraction of like say 0.2, because these will be pretty small, segments 2, just to give it a little bit of bevel, right? Because see, even just a small bevel, it just catches that light a little bit, right? Like real things do. Alright. So I'm going to hit Control S for save, and I'm going to duplicate this, right? Edit, duplicate. We've already seen this a little bit, and we're going to see plenty more this term. So edit, duplicate. This allows you to copy a whole object. Then I can move this over here, and then we can see there's kind of a couple more right there. So I can just duplicate this again. Control D is the quick key for that. Now here, you might want to scale it, right? R for scale, but you notice it does this. And that's one of the things we talked about on our bedposts. Remember, one of the things you can actually do is you can come in here and select components, right? So with my cursor over this object, right? Because if I put it here and then I hit right mouse and go to vertex, it does vertex for this one, right? So remember, usually put your cursor over the object, right? Hold down right mouse button, and it brings these up, right? You hold it down, you bring these up, vertex. What I can do is I can just left click drag that box, right? Remember when you left click drag off of an object, it selects just those, right? That's what pick marquee does. Now I can hit W for move, and I can move these down. There we go. And you see how we can change the overall length of this without scaling it, right? So remember, you can grab specific sections of this, even just those ones, to do things like these shapes, right? So remember, this is just shaping. And remember, you can get in here and do things with edges or vertices or faces, right? So I'm going to go back to object mode and edit, duplicate again. Move this one over here. That should be good enough. I don't think it's sticking through there at all that I can see. That'll work well enough. All right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the bar on the bottom here really quick. So I'll go create polygon primitives cube. It's a bit on the big side, so we'll move it forward. R for scale, scale it down a bit. W for move, there we go. Probably needs to be a little bigger, so I'll scale it back up, right? So remember, W for move, and you can move it just on along the green axis. Get it about there. R for scale, you can scale the whole thing up. In this case, though, we want to make it longer on the x-axis, right? So I can just scale on the red one. Now, in this case, I'm probably not going to need symmetry modeling, but if you did want symmetry modeling, put an edge up down the center. But in this case, kind of move forward a little bit. There we go. And then I can go to edge mode. I can select all the edges. But remember, you can selectively bevel too. You don't have to bevel every edge, right? So I'm going to bevel those guys really quick, and we'll give those a low fraction of, say, 0.2. Give it a segment of 0.2. Remember, you can type in the number, but you can also actually interactively adjust just by left-click dragging on the word, right? So if I hold down my left mouse button on the actual word, it's interactive. But you can, of course, highlight and type in numbers as well. All right, so now that gives us kind of all of our railing. And I'll select these right here really quick. Remember, Shift, right? You select an object, left-click on it. Remember, hold down right mouse button, object mode. Then I can just Shift, left-click, Shift, left-click, select those. Move this back just a little bit. There we go. Now in this case, remember, hold down Control will deselect. I want to mirror these over the other side, but it's going to be a lot easier to mirror these if they're one object. And it's going to be easier to do work with these later on if they're one object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to make these into one object. Right now there's several objects. Now, we've seen the mirror tool before, right? Mesh mirror. We've seen it a couple times. We're going to see it again today in a minute or two. But you'll notice one of the options in there is combine. Well, you'll notice in Modeling Toolkit, there is something called combine right here. And what it does is it takes several objects, because these are all separate objects, right? And when you hit combine, it makes them into one. Now you'll notice though they don't touch, right? If I hit 4 for wireframe, they are not touching each other, right? So believe it or not, in 3D you can have objects, remember 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded. The buttons are right here though. You can have objects that don't touch, right? So it's better to think of objects and objects level in Maya as kind of like an invisible box with a bunch of polygons in it. And those polygons don't even have to touch each other. Now, one of the things that you can do at this point also that could be cool, like say you've combined them, but you're like, oh man, I need to move this guy over a little bit. If I hold down right mouse button, right, remember you hold down right mouse button, it goes to these selection types, I can go to face selection type. Now, just like if you double left click on an edge, it selects an edge loop. If you double left click on a face, it selects only the connected faces. So even though they're one object, when I double click on this face, it selects only the faces that are actually directly connected to it. These aren't. And that gives me the ability to kind of move this guy wherever I want to, but still have them be one object. Kind of cool, right? So if you go into face mode and you double click on a face, double left click, it selects just the connected ones. Just like if you double click on an edge, it selects an edge loop. Right? So double left click, quite useful in Maya. Now at this point, I want to mirror these over. I just hit Control S to save often. Save multiple versions, that never hurts, right? If your file gets corrupted and you only had one file, guess what, guys? You're redoing that model. Sorry, that's just the way that works, right? Unless you really know how to program in my ASCII, file, maybe able to get it back. But generally, you want to save a couple different versions, or remember, you can use things like Windows, Settings, Preferences, Files, Projects, Autosave, right? If you don't trust yourself to save often, save a couple different versions, autosave, right? So in this case, what I want to do is I want to mirror these over. So I'm going to go to Mesh, right? Make sure you're in object mode though, right? Object mode to mirror. Mesh, mirror. I'm going to go to the options box for it. And in this case, I want to mirror it on the x-axis. I want to mirror it this way, right? And that's the red, which is x, right? And it's already got combine on, which is all that did, right? And usually I've cut geometry off, copy's fine, world's fine, zero, it's going to use the zero of the world, and we can mirror. Now what's cool is I can then hold down Shift, right, to left click on all these other objects, and then we can combine those. And now you'll see if we click off and then click back on one of them, they're all selected as one object. Now the cool thing is you could separate these, right? If I hit separate, it actually re-breaks them up into their constituent objects. So you can always separate if you need to. Now, if you started to bridge or merge vertices from one of these on the other ones, those ones you couldn't separate those. You'd have to use something like Edit Mesh Duplicate or Extract. And we've already seen a bit of Duplicate, right? We'll see Extract a little bit later on this semester. So you can still technically get objects separated from each other, even if they're seamlessly one part. We don't need to worry about it on this project, though. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mirror this back over there, right? So we make sure we're in object mode, right? Hold down this button, object mode. Mesh, mirror, under the options box. And we're going to pick Z because we want to mirror it this way, which is the Z axis. So we'll mirror it back there. Now the biggest problem we're running into right now is we can see that the back one is not as tall, right? So this is one of those things that, once again, just like we did, I was showing you a little bit here, and I showed you on the bedpost the other day. Make sure you have your cursor over your object. Hold down right mouse button, right, because that brings up all your selection types. Now, technically, you can do it in face mode or edge mode, but sometimes it's just a little easier with the vertex. Remember, there's no right or wrong with which selection type you use. It just depends on which is appropriate in the circumstance. In this case, vertex will be a little easier to work with. So we can hold down right mouse button over our object, move our cursor to vertex. What I can do is I could pick marquise bond by default. We'll talk about drag a little bit later on. Probably don't need it for this project. We'll start to need it in later projects. But if I left click drag, you'll see how I can just grab all of these vertices. If I hit 4 for wireframe, you can see how it really did just grab all the vertices on top, leaving the bottom ones alone. That's 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded. And since only those are selected, I just hit W for move, left click drag on that green arrow to move them up. And you'll notice we can now lengthen these without changing the overall bottom part of the shape, right? So this is one of the awesome things about 3D is you can actually make copies super easily and modify them really easily also, right? So keep that in mind for this stuff. All right, that'll be a great place to stop on this bed. So I'll just Control S for save, right? And then we'll make the pillows and the bedspread and do a little bit of cleaning up the outliner on the next video.